I'd like to encourage you, if you would, be turning with me to the book of Revelation tonight. We're going to be talking about the seven trumpets tonight, going through the first part of this. I don't think we're going to get into chapter 9, but I want us to look at chapter 8 this morning or this afternoon, whatever it is. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today. This is talking about the seven trumpets. We have, as we noted previously, seen that Jesus was opening the seven seals, and only Jesus could open those seals. And we note that he opened the sixth seal, and it discussed that. We had that interim, if you will. And then we are opening the seventh seal here as we go into chapter 8. Now we remember that John had received a great gift of hope, and this goes back to the persecution of the Christians in Asia Minor there in the first century. He had been transported to heaven, where a scroll or book, I would denote scroll, appeared with the promise to answer and encourage the people that were undergoing this desperate persecution. And again, as we have noted, even though this is focused upon those individuals, it is applicable whenever we have faced as Christians persecution throughout the ages. When Jesus began to open systematically and sequentially those seals, John saw a timeline of events that led from the seeds of gospel preaching to the present, or to his present distress. And again, as we have noted, he was on the Isle of Patmos. Now the time is right. Time is ready for the seventh seal to be opened and the seven trumpets to begin to sound. And these trumpets are going to designate that God is listening, God is hearing. He has not forgotten these people, and he never forgets those that are his throughout the ages. But God has not forgot them, and he's going to deal with the problems that they are facing. And we'll expand on that here in just a moment. In Revelation chapter 8, beginning there in verse 1, it says, "And when he broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and seven trumpets were given to them." Now, when we look at this, we note that John has possibly become accustomed to the blissful noise of heaven. I mean, there was singing, there was all kinds of things going on in heaven. On earth, this would have been interrupted by the tears and the cries of terror of what God's children were facing, the Christians there in Asia Minor. John had listened to the voices of thunder, voices and thundering, to songs and shouts, but now, as the seventh seal was opened, he was struck by silence for about 30 minutes. 30 minutes is half of an hour, denoting the idea that it was a specific time. The key to this is that this silence denoted that they need to be listening. Something important is going to transpire. The silence in heaven has also been called the quiet before the storm. And here's the situation. Rome is going to face a storm. It's not going to be a totality, but it is going to be a storm. The number 7, as we note with the seventh seal, the seven angels, a symbolic term used throughout the book, denoting perfection, fullness, or completion. things are going to happen. These seven angels will administer a full and complete judgment on a great enemy as dictated by God. The trumpets were used in ancient time to summon people to meetings, to signal movement of troops, and to warn of invading armies. And it's kind of like the bugler of our past here. The buglers bugled certain things to tell the people on the battlefield what they were supposed to do. These trumpets were a warning, a summons. Listen, something's going to happen. This is not that they're playing some type of a song, but these are calls for what's going to go on here. The trumpets here within this context, as well as we find over in the 10th chapter of the book of Numbers, announce the judgments of God that's going to be poured out upon his enemies. In verse 3 of Revelation chapter 8, this brings to light that some terrible things are going to come to pass on these individuals who were persecuting the Christians. Again, God has not forgot these people. He's telling them now in this apocalyptic language, things are going to happen and it's not going to be good. In verse 3, it says, another angel came and stood at the altar, holding a golden censer, and much incense is given to him, so that he might add to the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints went up before God out of the angel's hand. Well, when we think about this united assembly of angels, they received their trumpets. They were going to start something. It was listen. Something's fixing to come to pass. This is a warning as another of their kind approached the altar. So we have the seven angels, the seven trumpets. Another angel comes before the altar with incense added to the prayers of the saints. This brings to light the idea that we will note the prayers of the saints is that which is, why haven't you done something? Why haven't you come to help us? And we noted that previously here in the book of Revelation. With assurance, the man's prayers are reached, the only one who can answer them. The angel then casts a censer upon the earth, which causes a great symbolic harshness to resound again. They were struggling. They were in need. But it brings to light in this that God is hearing. God knows the problem. As we look at this picture, and some people say that Revelation is just a series of pictures, God's throne is likened to the Jewish temple. Before the throne is the altar of incense. And in Jerusalem, a priest offered the incense, and heaven an angel does. Along with that sweet-smelling incense are seen the prayers of the suffering saints going up before God. God hears. And that's what this is bringing to light to these people and to anyone that's facing persecution that are Christians in our world. He now reminds of their plight, and he's going to act. And that's what these trumpets are denoting, is that things are coming to fruition. These persecutors are going to be dealt with. In Revelation chapter 8 in verse 5 it says, then the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar and threw it to the earth. And there were peals of thunder and sound and flashes of lightning and an earthquake. And the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound them. In essence, it brings to light the idea that God is going to deal with the problem. Now, John borrows this picture from Ezekiel chapter 10, verses 1 and 2, where an angel took coals of fire from the altar in heaven and cast them over the sinful city of Jerusalem. It notes there in Ezekiel 10, going down to verse 1, it says, "Then I looked, and behold, in the expanse that was over the heads of the cherubim, something like a sapphire stone in appearance resembled a throne, appeared above them. And he spoke to the man clothed in linen and said, 'Enter between the whirling wheels under the cherubim, and fill his hands with coals of fire from between the cherubim, and scatter them over the city.' And he entered in my sight." This, of course, denotes the Babylonian situation where they had fallen away from God. They had not been obedient, and they were going to face the difficulties. The persecutors, Rome, was going to face this persecution. Ezekiel's symbol was fulfilled when Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian troops destroyed Jerusalem. John's angel's judgment upon the Roman Empire. And this is the key factor, is Rome. Those in Rome were the one that was persecuting, and the persecution was fixing to get worse as Domitian began persecuting Christians all over, especially in Asia Minor at the time. The judgment of the seven trumpets provides the detail of how it happened. What's going to take place? And I encourage you to look at verses or chapters 8 and 9, as well as the bowls of wrath, and do a little study on what transpired historically with Rome until the fall of Rome in about 600 AD. It notes here that the fiery judgment was upon the earth. In other words, it was a situation that was cast down into our world. Them that dwell on the earth is a favorite expression of John, as we note in Revelation 6:10, and is speaking not of men on earth in general, but the ungodly, who have no home but earth and want no other home. Those that do not have the mark of faithfulness, the mark of righteousness. The saints, they're but pilgrims here and strangers on the earth, as we have noted many times in 1 Peter 2:11. Their ultimate home is before the throne of God, where they will serve him day and night in his temple, Revelation chapter 7 and verse 15. That too being an encouragement. If we are those who have God's seal, if we are God's children, and we talked about that back in chapter 7, then we're blessed. We don't have to worry about the outcome of this wrath that God's going to bring out upon the Romans. In Revelation 8:7, it says, "The first sounded," this is number 1, "and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up." With the seven seals being opened and complete, the unit of angels prepared to blow their trumpets. The first sounded his horn, and a mixture of hail, fire, and blood was thrown to the earth, causing a third of the earth, all the green grass, to be incinerated. Now, that would have been a very concerning thing. The symbology of the judgment is borrowed a large part from the plagues that were sent on Egypt in Moses' day. And the people would have understood those things. They had already been, it was common knowledge. In Exodus 9:24, it talks about the hail and fire mingle with hail very grievous. I have to go back and check that passage. I'll check that passage when you get opportunity. Looks like that night crew made a mistake on that one. This judgment was upon the earth, and a third part of the vegetation was destroyed. The third part denotes the idea that this is not a complete annihilation, but a partial thing. This was going to happen. They were going to face the difficulties. They were going to face struggles. But it's not like God's going to come down and destroy everything like he will when Jesus returns. To understand what is intended, we must glance at the larger scene. The first four judgments fall on the earth, the sea, the fresh water, and the heavenly bodies. And to the ancients, this was the sum total of our natural world. It was what they knew. It's what we know here today. In this lesson, this first lesson, it is that judgment upon the persecutors would be all-encompassing. People's going to deal with this. It's going to be a struggle. Second, since men make their food by tilling the earth, and likely means that God would destroy their crops and send famine upon them, in essence, they face famine. And you can go back and read history that notes how during different times, the Romans dealt with famine and those kind of situations. We understand drought here. We understand that kind of a struggle. This will be evident as we look at others. This does not speak of a final judgment, as we note in 2 Peter 3, verse 10, but this is a partial judgment, 1/3 destroyed. And it is to warn the wicked and urge them to change their ways, to come to repentance. But we know with Domitian and all that's went on historically that these people there in Asia Minor really suffered diligently under that situation. In verse 8 it says, "The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And 1/3 of the sea became blood, and 1/3 of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed." Now the people would have understood this. Now, because of their perseverance and stature, mountains were used in Scripture symbolically to dictate great powers. And here the second trumpet slays one of these great powers. Now, we understand that the people of that area understood about volcanoes and earthquakes because they were quite regular. And we've all probably heard of the eruption of Vesuvius in August of AD 79, where Herculaneum and Pompeii perished. And I noticed recently there's more excavation and more study on Pompeii and some of the things that happened there. But they understood that. They understood what that was about. They also understood the symbolicness of this mountain. It also notes that the sea was becoming blood, reminds us of the judgment that we see in Egypt when the Nile became as blood in Exodus chapter 7, verses 20 through 25. It appears that the significant point is that the third part of the ships was destroyed. Now, again, not complete annihilation, but if you lost 1/3 of your ships, it was hard to transport food or whatever you needed from one place to the other, especially during times of famine. It would make it that much difficult. And Rome had a great merchant fleet. They uh, took their daily needs from around the Mediterranean in that area. It's also noted that they could have went even further out of the Med. Naval wars, storms, pirates could easily have fulfilled this judgment. Uh, God uses some very unique things to deal with those who persecute his people. In verse 10, it says, the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on the third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. Well, the third trumpet sent a star falling from heaven, which turned a third of the waters, not all, but a third of the waters, on the earth to wormwood. And again, noting that wormwood was a very bitter situation, and in some instances, probably poisonous. This third judgment was upon the fresh water, which men and cities derived their drinking water. And if you remember Rome, they had the viaducts. They had to bring water in from the mountains. And a lot of these places did not have good fresh water. So good fresh water was important. You know, we complain a little bit if you got a little jip in your water around here. We're fortunate that we don't have that at our house, but there's a lot of other places that water's very jippy. I know the first time I went to Sulphur, Oklahoma. Yeah, drive through there, and you think, who broke all the stinky eggs? You know, but the water is not good. Well, this wormwood was been that which would have gave the water a bitter taste, maybe even as it notes here, poisonous, and many men died. The star that fell from heaven indicates the origin of the disaster. That's from God. God's dealing with these people. At the very last part, it says wormwood is a general name for a class of plants known as Artemisia. Their characteristics is bitterness of taste. The bitterness of wormwood always stood for the bitterness of the judgment of God on the disobedience. And Rome dealt with plagues, pestilence. They had all kinds of things that went through there over the ages. Such a dreaded problem in those days. One of the plagues that struck Rome during the days of Marcus and Quirius, 2,000 people in Rome died in one day. So these plagues were terrible. And they had to deal with all this. And when we come back and we look at chapter 9, we're going to be denoting how all these countries, all these people around Rome, they dealt Rome persecution on their own. This is persecution because of the wormwood. In verse 12, it says, the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way. The fourth trumpet smites the third of the sun, moon, and stars. Now, think about briefly in your mind the sun, moon, and the stars. What do they have control over? Night and day. This brings to light the idea of those that are in control. Now, this, of course, being a cryptic message or apocalyptic message, it notes the symbolism of the overthrow of rulers and governments. And if you go back again and study Rome, if you didn't suit somebody in Rome, they didn't just kick you out. They usually cut your throat or stabbed you. We've heard all of those occurrences. It harkens back to Joseph's dream of the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down before him, talking about these rulers or these governments in Genesis chapter 37, verses 9 through 10. Now, his father immediately asked, shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come and bow ourselves down before you on the ground? Well, he was going to deal with all of these individuals that was in power, and we see a great chaos in Roman power if we look at history. The similar usage is seen in Isaiah 13, Isaiah 34, Joel 2, Acts 2, and Revelation 6. Thus, God's promise to send judgment of assassinations, coups, and turmoil in government. And Rome is known for that. I mean, it was unreal, the kind of things that were going on there. But since only a third part is darkened, this was not the final overthrow, but a warning to cease from their sin and oppression. And we think about the Roman Empire, and we always note that it came to an end about the 600s, 3 to 600, something along that timeline. But is it completely gone? That's the question that we ask. You know, when we look at the Roman Empire, it made a change into a religious faction. And that's something that you guys need to go back and think about and study about. Since only a third part was darkened, it was not the finality. In other words, God just didn't come down here and just dispose of Rome. Remember, that's what the people was constantly looking for. They wanted a Messiah to get rid of Rome. And if you look again at what was going on, not only in Rome and Jerusalem, Israel, all of this, that was just a small portion that was going on in that larger area. They were constantly at war. They were constantly going out and trying to access more people, more land. They were trying to conquer bigger places. And that was one of the things that got Rome in trouble. It's because they got too big. And they spread out too far. They could not control the people in these other countries that they had taken over. So in these verses, now this brings us up to chapter 9, but in these verses, it denotes that, number one, God hears the pleading of the saints. God hears it. Those prayers have come up. He's going to deal with it, but it's not going to be the absolute destruction that many are looking for or desirous of. But there will be a time when Jesus comes back that all of these things will be completed and they will come to an end. Now in verse 13, it says, then I looked and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, because the remaining blast of the trumpet of the three angels are about to sound. So this is coming up to the last three, and we'll talk about those next time that we look at this. Now, among the ancients, the eagle wagged a bird of ill omen, or was a bird of ill omen. I'll get into the word in a minute. He was well suited to announce an awful woes that were yet to come. Now, the King James uses the word angel, and most other translations use the word eagle. And I went back and I looked at the Textus Receptus, and it uses the word angel in the Textus Receptus. All the other texts that I own, that I looked at, I didn't get online or anything, but I did look at the ones that I own, which are several, and it uses the word eagle in the original language there. So we have a textual variant. Here's the key. Whether it's an angel or an eagle, things are going to get bad. Now, the word eagle that's translated into English, in some instances, using the original word, denotes the idea of a vulture. You know vultures? We all know vultures. Yeah. Turkey buzzards? Yeah. Well, that's more of the depiction that it is bringing to light here. So the expression mid-heaven means the zenith of the sky, the part where the sun is at midday. So this entity, I'm going to use that word, is soaring up here, looking down. It's not going to be good. Here we have a dramatic and eerie picture of an empty sky with a solitary eagle winging its way across its zenith, forewarning of the doom to come. Things are going to get bad. All of these things are going to happen. God's going to deal with this. A solitary eagle flying in midair, crying out in pity for the inhabitants of the earth, is out of its context bizarre, but set as it is, it's almost unbearably poignant. Things are going to get rough. It's going to get bad. And, you know, when we see a bunch of buzzards flying around over there someplace, we know that something catastrophe's happened. And it's most likely in the middle of the road. And they're trying to clean it up. They do their duty. They do their job. Not against buzzards as long as they get out of the way when I'm coming down the road. But here's the thing. This is bringing comfort to the knowledge that God hears, God knows, and God's going to deal with these persecutors, these Romans. Now, week after next, I think next week is singing week, singing Wednesday. We will go into chapter 9. So go back and read that, look at that, and we will talk a little bit about some of the persecution that they're going to face. And as history denotes, Rome has faced, but God always hears. He always hears when we need Him. He always hears our prayers. We'll start there next time.